The BBC will report from across the globe as the world witnesses the inauguration of President Barack Obama. Tomorrow from 4 on BBC One and BBC Radio.
The BBC News now on BBC One, with Hugh Edwards in Washington and Fiona Bruce in London.
Tonight at 10, another multi-billion-pound rescue plan for the banks, but their share prices fall sharply. Royal Bank of Scotland reveals unprecedented losses. Its shares fall by 2/3 to just 12 pence. That's despite a huge government plan to protect the banks from their bad debts and encourage lending again.
I will not sit idly by and let people go to the wall because of the irresponsible mistakes of a few bankers.
The truth is, it is a desperate admission that the first bank bailout hasn't worked and that the country's got no option but to try and rescue the banks again.
We'll be looking at whether the banks need billions more of our money and whether it'll help the economy. Also tonight, Gaza after the fighting. Palestinian officials estimate 22,000 buildings need reconstruction. Ken Clarke steps back onto the floor to take on his old rival, Peter Mandelson.
And we're in Washington, where America's first black president will be sworn in tomorrow, watched by many millions. He's promising a hands-on presidency, joining charity volunteers today, setting the tone, he says, for the next 4 years.
And in BBC London News, 3 men charged with helping the July the 7th bombers are retried in court and killed in a hit and run by a failed asylum seeker. His family ask why the driver hasn't been deported.
Good evening. The government has unveiled another multi-billion-pound rescue plan for the banks as their share prices dropped sharply. Royal Bank of Scotland saw the worst fall. It's on course for the biggest annual loss in British corporate history, as 2/3 were wiped off its share value. The government's plan is to insure banks against bad debts by underwriting them. The government admitted it couldn't say how many billions of taxpayers' money would be needed, but insisted the measure was necessary to free up credit and get the banks lending more freely. Here's our business editor, Robert Peston.
The Treasury, on October the 13th, saved the banks from collapse, or at least 2 of them. Today, the same government team tried to save the economy with another massive package of taxpayer support for lending. But there appeared to be a resounding yaboo from the city because the share prices of most of the biggest banks plunged, with Royal Bank of Scotland falling by 2/3. The Prime Minister put his finger on only part of the reason for Royal Bank's fall, its appalling results.
I'm angry at the Royal Bank of Scotland and what happened. Almost all the losses are in the subprime market in America and related to the acquisition of the bank AMB Ambro. And these are irresponsible risks that were taken by a bank with people's money in the United Kingdom.
So what's the great plan to restore banks' confidence and increase the supply of credit? Well, the big elements include a £50 billion fund backed by taxpayers, which will be used by the Bank of England to buy up loans to companies to reduce the cost of funds for big business. There's also an estimated £100 billion of taxpayer guarantees to try to channel cash held by big investment funds into mortgages and other loans. But it's a plan to insure the banks against losses on their dodgy loans that's most controversial. And what a turn-up. Normally, we go to banks to buy insurance, but under the government's new scheme, they'll come to us, taxpayers, for cover to protect them from the full horror of loans and investments that go bad. So what's the value of loans that we'll be underwriting? How much will we be at risk? Well, the Treasury won't give a specific number, but it could run to hundreds of billions of pounds.
I think we need a full independent audit of what is on the bank balance sheets. So we don't rely on the word of bank chief executives, we don't rely on the word of the Prime Minister, but the taxpayer is told the truth in an independent and authoritative way.
So why is all our money needed to stimulate lending? Well, we're in a pretty deep recession. In fact, the European Commission today forecast that our economy would shrink by 2.8% this year, worse than the European average and worse than the Treasury expects. The prime cause of our recession is a shortage of credit, and our woes will be all the worse if lending can't be revived. But why, therefore, has the Treasury's credit rescue plan so spooked investors? Why has Royal Bank's share price fallen from more than 600p in 2007 to just 12p today? Well, the fear of investors is that with taxpayers providing so much support to the banks, any spoils would go to the state in the form of fees and to UK households and companies in the form of lending mandated by the Treasury at uncommercial interest rates. So, to save the United Kingdom, shareholders reckon they'll get the slimmest possible returns for years to come. Robert Peston, BBC News.
As we've heard, today's bailout means new guarantees, loans and support to the banks, amounting to hundreds of billions of pounds. So what's the risk to the taxpayer? Our economics editor, Hugh Pym, reports.
Miserable Monday when the Christmas bills come in and people feel gloomiest, according to experts. Hopefully they weren't thinking too hard about the implications of today's measures, with yet another burden for taxpayers. The Chancellor was looking on the bright side.
The Bank of England or ourselves will be taking securities, or fees will be charged in order to protect the taxpayer interest. But I say this to the honourable gentleman, the cost of doing nothing would be far, far greater and far, far more damaging.
But you've only got to look at the RBS experience to see where things can go horribly wrong. Its share price plunge came after it revealed the worst ever corporate loss, partly down to the takeover of ABN AMRO at the top of the market. Like other banks, it's facing up to big risks in the months ahead. Bad loans. RBS revealed up to £7 billion worth of those written off as companies collapse in the global recession. Risks like falling global markets. RBS lost almost £3 billion on overseas operations in just 3 months. Up to 400 million of that in the huge fraud by Wall Street trader Bernard Madoff. And also shrinking assets. RBS, like other banks, has been forced to slash the value of investments, such as subprime mortgages. They've been reduced by an astonishing £8 billion. With those problems, banks rein in lending and industries like car manufacturing suffer. Jaguar stopped production for 2 weeks at one factory from today. It's struggling to borrow, so too its customers. The Treasury's had to step in because of the extraordinary scale of the bank losses. Only the government has the resources to revive the banking system and so help the wider economy. That's why taxpayers' money has been pumped into the banks and yet more pledged in guarantees for loans which may go wrong in the future.
The big worry about this insurance scheme is particularly in an environment where so many bad loans have got to come to fruition, commercial property for example, is that the taxpayer is going to pick up tens of billions of pounds worth of liabilities.
And agree with the deal or not, many people are worried.
It's greedy bankers that have got us in this mess.
If I let the banks go to the wall, then I think everything's, meltdown.
For those heading home tonight, there's no simple answer about the risk to taxpayers. It's even possible the government might make money if the losses don't materialise, but don't bet on it. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, our business editor Robert Peston joins me now. Robert, dramatic day for the banks. So where do today's events leave Britain's biggest banks?
Well, look, the Prime Minister has been lecturing the banks that they've got to come clean about the scale of their losses. Funnily enough, that's actually spooked the city because basically investors are saying if the Prime Minister doesn't know the scale of the problem, what hope is there for the rest of us? Now, there's another reason why investors have become very fearful about the prospects for some banks, and that is with taxpayers committing these hundreds of billions of pounds, well, they say, of course there will be returns for people who need credit. The Treasury is going to force the banks to lend more, possibly at uncommercial rates, and there'll be big fees for taxpayers in return for all this lending, and nothing left for shareholders, perhaps for years. So they see what's going on as nationalisation by the back door. Now, there's a lot of talk tonight that with the share price collapse of Royal Bank of Scotland, perhaps it will be formally nationalised. But actually the people I talk to say it's an irrelevance. The system, and particularly Royal Bank of Scotland and one or two others, are already effectively under state control. So what need is there actually to go the further step of owning the banks in total?
OK, Robert, thanks very much. Now, more Israeli troops have been pulling out of Gaza today as the scale of the devastation there becomes clearer. After 3 weeks of fighting between Israel and Hamas, tens of thousands of people are now homeless. The UN estimates it will cost billions to repair the damage to Gaza's infrastructure. From Gaza City, Paul Wood sent this report.
Parts of Gaza look as if an earthquake has hit. In this one street, every single house was damaged or totally flattened. People were in shock as the scale of the devastation sank in. Look what they've done, says Fatin Al-Jarou. She'd come to see if her house was still standing. It's that pile of rubble on the right. Where shall we go, she says, between sobs. Families took what they could from the wreckage. People still seem a little stunned by everything that's happened, as if they haven't quite yet worked out what it will all mean. One question, of course, is whether Hamas has been strengthened by all this, or whether the Islamist movement will be blamed for the destruction here. Did Hamas gunmen draw Israeli fire at these homes? Local people were adamant there were only civilians present. So did the Israelis commit war crimes in Gaza? The UN says they may have done at this school in Beit Lahia. Families had come to seek refuge. Many remain. But an Israeli shell crashed through the roof. It killed two brothers aged just 5 and 7. The incendiary white phosphorus was also used. It still litters the school grounds.
This is a place which is full of civilians who had been forced to flee their home in looking for safety, and we see absolutely no reason. I mean, a hit on a facility like this, full of civilians, it just cannot be justified. Certainly, in the little time that we've been here, we have seen prima facie evidence of war crimes.
Israel will dispute that. But the Israelis are leaving. So Hamas is back on the streets. The Islamists say they're stockpiling more rockets. A hostile act, says Israel. On its first day, the ceasefire already begins to look a little shaky. Paul Wood, BBC News, Gaza.
Ken Clarke said he was delighted to be back on the Conservative front bench today, taking up his new role as Shadow Business Secretary. The former Chancellor will go head-to-head with Labour's Lord Mandelson. As Rita Chakrabarti now reports, the battle of the big beasts is on.
Morning, Mr Clarke.
Morning, Mr Clarke.
Are you pleased to be back in frontline politics?
He certainly was, and unable to resist a sideswipe at his opposite number, Lord Mandelson.
I know Peter quite well, and I always get on with him quite well personally, but I found his return rather startling.
Startling perhaps, but Westminster relishes the prospect of a strictly politics showdown. If Ken Clarke is a relaxed old jiver, resistant to makeovers and indifferent to political correctness, Peter Mandelson is all smoothness and slick control. Both are agile and quick on their feet, but who will lead whom, and which will get the public's vote? Ken Clarke's cigar-smoking, jazz-loving, slip-on shoes style has lots of appeal. He's headed 4 big government departments and clashed with doctors, teachers and the police. 3 times he ran for party leader but failed. The reason? He's a pro-European in a Eurosceptic party who even shared a platform with the Labour leadership.
People are asking themselves, how on earth can you serve under a Eurosceptic leader?
Well, as you say, my views on Europe are very well known and they haven't changed. Anyone who wants to look them up can look them up, and I'm pro-European and David is a Eurosceptic, but we know each other's views on Europe. There's no current issue dividing us.
It may not be current, but that could easily change. While David Cameron showed off his new big hitter, one arch Eurosceptic let slip that behind the scenes things had been smoothed over.
The leadership is making it crystal clear today and have reassured me that they have no wish to change the policy in a pro-European integration direction, and they're fully aware that they need a party which, with the exception of just a few people, is completely united around the agenda of getting power back from Europe.
Ken Clarke's appointment is a big risk. He's a blunt Europhile who's deeply distrusted in some quarters of the party. But he's also got a public profile that could upstage that of the Shadow Chancellor. Mr Clark took his place on the front bench for the first time in nearly 12 years. David Cameron is gambling that bringing the big beast back in this time of economic crisis will outweigh all the risks. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Nick Robinson, who's in Downing Street. Nick, Ken Clarke's back, but he's not the only change. What's your assessment of the reshuffle?
Well, my assessment is